Did our Arab parents' belief system played upon the traditional gender role expectations? And how did we integrate such expectations as we went through the process of simulating ourselves into the new world, quote unquote, Western society? Hello, and thank you for joining us again for another episode of Chatting with Slava the Jordanian. I'm your host, STJ, on the Mindset Mastery Moments. Today, joining us, our favorite panel, my co-host, JD Yusef and Dr. Ihab Abdurrahim. And we're going to try to take a micro view on whether the traditional gender role expectations belief system was part of the narrative of us growing up and whether we believe it or not. So when we research traditional gender role expectations, it says immigrants often carry traditional gender role expectations from their home countries, which can influence their behavior and attitudes in their new society, which is our new world. However, the extent to which these expectations are maintained or adopted varies, influenced by factors like the host country's norms and the individual's expectations. So let's turn to our panels. I would like to start with my co-host, JD Yusef. Just give us a view of this concept.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Slava, for having me, and Dr. Ihab. I have a lot to say about this naturally. I grew up in a traditional gender value home. It actually plays a huge part on the way that you're brought up, the way you think, and also living in a different culture away from your natural home. You have to balance kind of this culture that you're living in and then the one that you're actually based upon and raised in inside the home. So it's definitely a balancing act. And Dr. Ihab, I'm sure you can kind of elaborate a lot on that as well from your perspective.
Absolutely. So the typical gender roles from me growing up, watching my parents when they immigrated here from the United States in 1970, really kind of followed that Arab, I would say Islamic maybe, kind of gender roles. I would say more Arab than Islamic. I don't think it's kind of Islamic, but it's more Arab. And I will tell you some stories. My mom was a little bit more, like a free bird. So it was a little tougher for my dad because my dad was very kind of militant in that way, that he kind of was expecting my mom to do certain things, but my mom kind of would break the mold on that a little bit. But we'll tell those stories later. But yeah, when they came, it was the typical gender roles that you would expect from a husband and wife from an Arab country. And it was really interesting for me to watch because I grew up in that environment, but I also grew up as an American in a way because I went to kind of, Western schools here in the United States after 1970 when we arrived. So watching them as I grew up and watching kind of other families, American families, it was very different. But again, when we visited Arab families, they would be very similar to ours. So that's kind of what I experienced personally. So, and I'll turn it back to Dr. Slava, and she can kind of provide some more insight.
So remember, these episodes is all about storytelling. So in order to have you guys, our viewers and our listeners, to relate to such concepts, we will give you some examples of how we experience these concepts. Okay. So my household, let me just give you an example. Remember, my dad originally is Palestinian, but he was born and raised in Jordan. And all his ancestries, all the way up to the beginning of the 20th century, they were born in Salt, Jordan. My mom is Jordanian, the tribal culture of Jordan. Very, very traditional tribal personality. When I say that, it means that number one, the most important thing for her was family. You protect the family, and ask Ihab, he's seen it in action. You protect the family, you do everything for the family, you always stick to the family is always right. And that is her traditional tribal connection. And moving from Jordan to Saudi Arabia, my mom thrived. My dad didn't. My father is more egalitarian, libertarian. He was an artist. He was a writer. He always advocated for human rights, civil liberties, and he was a huge feminist too. So he did not thrive in Saudi Arabia. He tried, God bless him, he tried so much to simulate into the Saudi Arabian culture, but it wasn't specifically, I believe now as an adult, it wasn't specifically the Saudi Arabia culture, it was the traditional tribal culture that he did not believe in, he did not identify with. Now, that said, my father grew up in Egypt. From 8th grade all the way to college, he was in all-boys boarding school. Affluent Jordanians in the 40s and the 50s, that's what they did. They sent their boys to Egyptian boarding school. It was the best education in the Middle East. So from 8th grade, he did not live in Jordan. He was in Egypt. Of course, Egypt was the Paris of the Middle East. So take that, then going back to Jordan, then he had to go back to Saudi, to a lot more conservative tribal culture. So my dad did not thrive in that. My dad constantly was trying to create his own world within Saudi Arabia. My mom expectations, not necessarily very classic, stringent male-female role, but she expected indirectly from girls to act the role and from boys to act the role. The boys protected the girls in the family. It's tribal, right? It's Bedouin tribe tradition. And she expected the girls to be a lot more adaptive, a lot more tolerant, a lot more patient with the boys' expectation. So it's all about the tribe. Now, that's interesting because my mom education, she went to American University in Beirut in Lebanon. Okay. So you would think that even as a high school graduate, leaving Jordan, going into Lebanon, that traditional gender role expectation will be kind of eroded as she mingled into that American society. And she loved everything about American culture. She used to tell me that the first time I ate cornflakes was in the cafeteria in the AUB. It was an amazing concept, cornflakes and milk, and have cereal in the morning. And remember, she came back from Salt. It's all about bread and cheese and olive oil and olives and farm food. So she really respected the American culture. That was her first exposure to American culture in the American University of Beirut. Now, when she went back, because her circumstances, she went back, her mom passed away, Jiddati Halima, when she was 37 years old from kidney failure. Now, the youngest child, the youngest sister, my mom's one of 6, the youngest girl, the youngest sister was 4 years old. So when my mom went back in these circumstances, I think the traditional gender role expectations kicked in again. And she got to practice that going back to Salt, going to Jordan. That's when she met my dad, got married. Rest is history. They ended up in Saudi Arabia. So my mom thrived in Saudi. She felt like Saudi Arabia really offered her a playground to re-practice that traditional gender role expectation and the classical tribal connection, right? And she wanted us to really implant ourselves in the Saudi culture, especially when my aunt married, a part of Al Sudairi family. And that just confirmed, validated, affirmed, like, okay, this is meant to be. I am meant to be in that kind of culture and society. But the tug of war as we reach the high school age, and we had to think about college and whether we're not Saudi citizens, so we didn't have the Saudi privilege right to go into fields just like medicine and dentistry. We are still Jordanian, right? So we had only two options: to go back to Jordan or to come to the United States. And like I said in other episode, I related and identified with the American culture because I was vacationing in the United States since I was 7 years old. And my mom had that kind of experience in AUB, the American University of Beirut. She was okay with it. Not until she find out that her kids wanted to settle in the United States. That was a big no-no. How could you not come back home? That's your expectation. You are going to get higher education. It's your responsibility, your expectation to go back home to serve your family and serve your community. Why Jordan's not good enough for you? We sacrifice. So I can go on and on and on about how she felt about that. And when I decided to marry my Egyptian darling in American, she knew that there's no way for me to go back. This is it. I'm going to be here working, living. And that was it. And that was a huge blow to her emotional state because it went against everything that she believed. And I felt bad, but your parents live their life and you have to live your life. So again, that's where my parents stood as far as traditional gender role expectations. My dad did not believe in it. Absolutely not. Did not believe in it, did not practice it, did not apply it, did not preach about it. My mom did to a certain point, to a certain level. She wasn't an extremist about it, but she did. And she used to tell me, just like I learned from my mentor, that a dignified Arab woman is a individual that respects herself, the people around her, and the space that she occupies. And my mom was very, very highly dignified person because of the Bedouin heritage. That's the traditional, tribal practices that mentally, not practices in her life. She was always about education. She's always about travel. She was about art and culture, museums. I mean, she loved history, sociology, science. But when it came to marriage, relationships, your duty, your role, be above and beyond education, above and beyond career, she expected you to come down from your high horse and just be that dignified Arab traditional woman. I hope this makes sense to you guys.
Yes, and Dr. Slava, do you attribute her flexibility of kind of at least being open-minded, and I guess, for lack of a better term, more liberal in her thinking as far as traditional gender roles? You said she wasn't very militant, nor seems like your father was either, but do you attribute that to her time in Lebanon? And for our listeners and viewers who don't know, traditionally in the Middle East at this time, Lebanon was kind of looked at as very affluent, casinos, the James Bond image that you have, that was very much, in Beirut at the time. And so this American way of thinking was definitely, very, very popular. So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, my mom was very interesting personality in the way she was very strategic in choosing what belief system to practice in what situation. So I believe now, as an adult, I believe that it's a survival mode. And remember, she left everything behind, everybody she loves, everything she knew in Jordan, and she went to Saudi Arabia to start all over. And the circumstances were not very favorable circumstances. That was not her plan. Her plan was finish AUB, get the rest of her scholarship used to go to Canada, to go to medical school. But the circumstances, like I said, her mom passed away. She kind of deferred on that, trying to delay that stage of her life. But, then she met my dad and fell in love and they got married. And then she tapped into that traditional gender role expectation. My dad never wanted to get married. My dad wanted her to be his life partner and be a girlfriend forever. My mom said, absolutely not. She told me that. She said, no. When she felt like the relationship was getting serious enough, it's like, okay, it's time for us to get married. My dad's like, no, my dad doesn't believe in marriage. Didn't believe that a piece of paper or family should force you. That's how egalitarian he was. Wow. A woman can do whatever she wants. If she wants a life partner, she should have a life partner. If she's happy, then that's fine. But that's when my mom, the guilt trip, tapped into the traditional gender role expectation. But leaving her country and pursuing an opportunity in Saudi Arabia in order for her to teach and be an academic and build that reputation in Saudi Arabia, she loved that. She absolutely enjoyed it. The way she taught all these girls, she was math and science teacher in a private school, all girls private school in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. The way I saw her, I attended her classes, the way she taught these girls, it was in a very egalitarian style. See, so she tapped into that. So my mom was almost like a chameleon. Okay, this situation need me to be a little bit more traditional. That's why she's very successful with her relationship in Saudi. And she became very, very influential socialite, if you would like. And she mingled very, very well with the royals. She helped a lot of people with her royal connection, a lot of Saudi women with her royal connection. And I wrote those stories on my Instagram account. And maybe one day I will share it with the audience on one of my episodes. But she was very interesting. So me growing up, I was very confused. Where do you fit? Where's your position, mom? When it comes to me, you want me to get my education, you want me to get higher education, but in a traditional style. It doesn't work for me. I'm more like my dad. Take a position, stick to it, move on. Take a position, stick to it, move on. But she was very strategic, very talented that way. And that's, I think, why she successfully survived and thrived in Saudi Arabia. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. And, I know we brought up Lebanon and its influence. Can't also forget about Egypt. Literally, Egypt led the Cultural Revolution for practically the whole Middle East. And that's why a lot of Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, Jordanians can understand a lot of the Egyptian dialect. And it's from the movies and the songs and, Kulthum, for example. And I'm saying all this to say, and I'd like to kick it to you, Dr. Ihab, with this very vibrant and, uplifting way of thinking, especially with the Egyptian people. You said your dad still was entrenched in this traditional gender role, very much, militant, right? And I can also say the same thing for my father, right? How did you reconcile that with kind of the culture and then also with the American culture?
Well, for me, I watched my dad, and I was always a rebel, I think. And I think that bothered my dad a lot, that when I was growing up, I would always kind of contradict or ask questions. And he expected me with the traditional, again, gender role of a son, right? Because we're talking about parents, but traditional gender role of a son, that I would just do exactly as he expects me to do or as he asks me to do. And I never did that. And I think I drove him crazy up until, I don't know how old I was at the point. Even till before he passed away, I was a little bit like that. But I really kind of loosened up a little bit later on in life. But he'd be asking me, can you do this? Or can you take care of this? Like expecting me, because I'm the male of the family, the son, to just say, oh yeah, sure, I'll do it. And I would always ask him why. That was my first, actually, the first thing that came out of my mouth was no. And the second thing that came out of my mouth was, why do you want me to do this? Because in my mind, I wasn't being obstinate or not wanting to do it, but I questioned everything in my life. And I think that could be more of the American side of me. I learned that in school, and I kind of was, and that's why I'm probably a scientist now. When I graduated from school, I was a chemist, and it's that idea of always questioning, you know, whatever you're working on in chemistry. You always question it, you always research it, and I'm a big researcher with everything, even if I'm buying something from Amazon. So I did that same thing growing up, and my dad was would get really irritated with me because I would just say, why? And it was like I wasn't doing it again to be, you know, a bad son. I was just doing it because it's automatic for me. It's in my nature, and that's again why I probably went into chemistry and got my PhD. So, and Slava could talk more about that because she used to see that with me, how I interacted with my dad and my mom. It's funny. If I asked my mom that, like, you know, why, she would answer the question. My dad would just boom. He would expect me, like, whatever he says, I just gotta say yes.
I think you take after Ihab a lot. I see a lot of her in you, and I hear a lot of her in you. But I think my father-in-law saying why, that's you're defying him, right?
Oh,
Where in your end, from your end, you were just very inquisitive. You know,
yeah.
it's like I just need to know the reason why, because you're a learner, Ihab, so because I need to learn. But Abu Ihab always stepped on that traditional gender role expectations. Yes, sir. You know, you're my son. I gave you life. I brought you here for better education, for better life. You owe me the yes. You owe me to say yes. And he used to tell me that. It's like, why can't he just say yes? I'm like, I've been married to this guy he doesn't even say yes to me. He goes, but I'm his father. And I say, yeah, my mother-in-law completely totally appreciated that trait in Ihab. She was so proud of him that he does not follow the rules and he is his own person and he's very inquisitive. He's very smart. He used to say, "Inta smart zay mama," right? You are smart just like your mom. That's how she took all that credit. Ihab, the way she raised Ihab is like she never had a partner. She's like an amoeba that created Ihab.
Yeah.
She did not give Abu Ihab any credit, you know.
Right.
Yeah, that's how confident she is. That's how she was the feminist. I mean, my mother-in-law oozed feminism. And you know, the funny thing is, I don't know if you, Ihab, remember when our parents met for the first time in Austria, how well my dad got along with your mom.
Oh my God, it was hilarious. Oh my God. I remember when we'd all go out and, you know, the parents would sit together on the table, kind of the four of them. I never saw your dad laugh so much when he was talking to my mom. The stories they would tell, you know, they just would talk about everything, you know, anything and everything. They talked about Egypt in the past and, you know, and they would share stories about, you know, when your dad was in Egypt and my mom was in Egypt still. And they would just be cracking up, talking about music, Kulthum, everything. They would just bring up everything and they would just be laughing and laughing. And your mom would just be kind of sitting there and sometimes she would talk to us, right? And it would just kind of talk to us or talk to my mom. Your mom would talk to my dad sometimes. But again, my dad's quieter a little bit. So he was just kind of just sitting there a little bit most of the time. But yeah, watching them interact was fun.
Because remember, Ihab did modeling when she was in Egypt. When she was single, she modeled for a department store. She traveled. She did not see the need of marriage. For her, marriage was tying her down, anchoring her too much. You know, she wanted to be a free bird. My father, right? He grew up outside of Jordan, mostly Egypt. So he was in the parties and Khalil Khalili and the music and the poet and the artist. My mother-in-law is an artist, right? She made patterns. She made clothes. She is an artist. My father is a writer. He's an artist. So they had a lot in common. And they had such a good sense of humor. They just loved to party. Now, seeing that dynamics, like Ihab said, when they're sitting all four of them at one table, my mom and my father-in-law, the traditional tribal, right? They're so quiet and reserved, and they're sitting like soldiers. And my dad and Ihab was so animated, so loud, right? They just had a blast. So it's very interesting, although Ihab comes from that traditional countryside, the northeast of the Nile, Mahalla al-Mansura, they are, farming communities, right? Very traditional, very conservative. It's all about the people. It's all about the land. It's all about the family, the neighbors. But my mother-in-law, she grew up in Shubra in the city. Her ancestors are tribes, the southern tribes of Egypt. So she was in the parties, the saraya, the mansions, mingling with the rich because she made the clothes, custom-made clothes, and she just had that flair about her. So I've seen it, the tug of war between Ihab and Abu Ihab, and when they came to the United States, and Ihab is a lot more like his mom.
It's the TV, the movies, the things she watched. She would see, women are more independent here. And she had that independent nature inside her from Egypt. And it just came out more and more. And that's where that friction increased actually between my dad and her for that reason. And so that was, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, that's kind of, I watched it happen over time.
No, and Ihab loved to relate to other cultures because she loved travel. She was passionate about travel. So she loved to meet Portuguese, Cuban, Dominican, Spanish, Italian, especially French. She just oozed that persona that, oh my God, I'm international. Tell me more. I like to learn more. Your dad liked it, but in a very conservative approach. But let's go back to J.D. Yusef.
Yeah, so I said that my dad was a little militant in their perception, and also you got to look at it both sides. Like we grew up in a very open-minded, pluralistic, very traditional though. But my dad would do the dishes sometimes or cook sometimes, right? And that's, sometimes a no-go. But it definitely shaped the way that we think. I'll just say that right now, the way that it used to be, this way of thinking is not mainstream anymore, especially with the youth, Arab Americans. You'll hardly find, a lot of these women in our community that kind of follow or want to follow this way of thinking. They do prefer a more egalitarian approach, which, makes sense. We live in a different society. We live in a different world. Not everyone has the luxury of having, their wife stay at home and, taking care of the kids, right? That's almost like a thing of the past, unfortunately. So it's more about adapting nowadays, how I see it, with this new generation. So, it's an interesting dichotomy, right? You grew up thinking and you're raised saying it should be like this, but also, good luck trying to find that, right? And honestly, if you find that, great, but, I grew up in a household where, the female was very strong, independent, and she also expected, help. So, I come from a family where I can do the cooking, the cleaning, the, normal stuff that are just associated with female. But, anyway, yeah, I think it should be like that, a little egalitarian. You should help one another and support one another. And it could be in the household and it could be outside of the household, right? So,
yeah. I'm glad you were like that because I wasn't like that. I never washed dishes. I never did anything. It's not because the egalitarian thing, it has nothing to do with that. I believed in it. It's just that I I never wanted to do any of that stuff anyway. I wanted to be hanging out with my friends. So the first thing I do, I just would leave the house. And it's not because I believe my mom should do it. It was just me. And I later on in life, it's funny, I became more like that, and I was cooking, especially after Slava and I got married. I was cooking and things, things like that. But yeah, growing up, you were saying that you were cleaning and washing dishes. For me, I started washing dishes after I became a busboy dishwasher as my first job, and that's why I like washing dishes now. And Slava hates that I wash the dishes by hand, and she asked me to put it in the dishwasher. I wash my dishes by hand because it just feels like it's great. I feel good when I wash dishes, and it's weird to say that.
That's so funny.
Oh yeah.
And not to cut you off also, and I think Dr. Slava can elaborate on this very much, but as you're speaking, Dr. Ihab, my sister again, was raised very much in this way. She has to do X, Y, and Z, and she was the rebel. She cannot stand stuff like that, and I don't blame her. So it was almost like the choice for me, it was a little more liberating, I mean, I can do it, but I don't have to. I'm not expected. But I mean, in my head, I felt like it was good, short-term, long-term, workout. And I'm also, pleasing my mom at the same time, so that was like a big thing for me. So, but yeah, I think the choice with the male, is a little different. I don't want to sound like I'm, uplifting myself, but I think that has a huge thing to do with it. Dr. Slava, do you agree?
Both of you guys, as male Arabs, Yusef, you were born here in the United States. Ihab came when he was 2 years old. It's fascinating to see how a concept that might have been imposed on you guys, you went the other way, because I never knew how to cook. I didn't need to learn how to cook growing up because we were privileged enough to have, people making our meals. But Ihab taught me how to cook. When I got married, I had no idea. I couldn't even fry an egg. So Ihab taught me how to cook. I think part of it, him being in a fraternity house and they did their meals and he worked in a restaurant and stuff. But yeah, and he loved washing dishes. And I tell him, "You wasting water. Just put it in the dishwasher." And he goes, "I love the sound of water." It's like, "But you're wasting a lot of water."
It's a Zen experience.
And I like that about him. He's like, "Oh, do this and do that." And then, of course, I built on the recipes. Trust me, we don't eat what Ihab taught me 33 years ago, we'd be in a big trouble. But it's we eat much, much better. But it's interesting how your sister, and again, it's almost like psychologically said, "Okay, that's expected to me. I'm going to go the other way." Ihab, the same thing. That's expected to me. I'm going to go the other way. Interesting enough, my brother, he's an amazing cook and he loves to do chores and housework. I think from him is very meditating. The other two boys, they want nothing to do with it. But it really depends on the personality. But that brings me to the concept is why the traditional gender role expectations were created through history. So according to my research, the concept was born upon what society needs, what's really necessary for society to survive and thrive. For example, from the beginning of history, they found out like women are a lot more tender, they're nurturing, they're more patient. So, okay, you as a female take care of the children. Men are stronger, they can take a beating, they can protect themselves back then, and then they can go out, the hunters and the gatherer. They go hunt and they provide the food, and the women are a lot more patient. I say that. There's an article that was written, they took 93, I think, females from Eastern Europe and Western Europe, and they asked them the same questions about what do you think of the traditional gender role expectations of the female through history and in society. And both groups egalitarian group and conservative group said that yes, we women do have characteristics and properties that qualify us to take care of family and to take care of children and to take care of the home, because of our, innate characteristics. So that's why, according to my research, the traditional gender role expectations was created. Is what does society need in order to society to survive and thrive, regardless of the circumstances? And they created that classification of the gender role, expect you to do this and expect you to do that. If we don't do these two things, we're not going to be able to survive, right? But of course, time have changed. People have changed, culture have changed, society have changed. And now we are tapping into the hybrid of both in the Arab household, right? So let's try to answer that question. Where does this belief system that our parent had, or some of our parent had, in the way we navigate through this structural, Western world, culture and society, our home world? So I know I never birthed children. We don't have kids. So, we were never worried about, okay, what are we going to transfer to our children? Are we going to transfer traditional gender role expectation or more egalitarian, attitude? Yusef, you have nephews, right? And at one point you're going to have children. What do you think you're going to transfer? How are you going to transfer that belief system?
Yeah, that's a very, very great question. And I believe we've actually answered that in previous episodes in saying that I think we're all in agreement as far as this clash of cultures. You just really want to take the good of both cultures and toss the bad in both cultures as well. I mean, you have to be honest with yourself, with your people, with how you were raised, right? And do the Dr. Ihab thing and ask yourself why. It's very important, to really learn and understand where these concepts come from, or why someone would take a certain position this way. Is it out of fear? Is it out of protection? Is it because you're in your, people don't like to venture out of their comfort zone naturally. So, I mean, I totally understand that.
So let's say now you're married and you have your first child. How do you think they're going to perceive that? You're going to raise them here in the United States. Let's say your first child is a baby girl. As a parent, and I hear that from parents, and my mom, like I said, being an academic, and I spent a lot of time in schools with children. I was a full-time nanny before dental school. I worked in daycare. And, early child development years are very, very important. And that's when you plant the seeds into their belief system. If your first child is a girl, how do you think you're going to go about trying to explain to her this hybrid belief system? Take the good from both beliefs and creating your own. I think that's the only fair way to help children with Arab ancestry, respect our tradition, but also at the same time, you need to have them create their own tradition, their own belief system that they identify with because of all the challenges. Yes, maybe your household is going to be a little bit more of a Palestinian tradition, transfer that power from your parents. It's like, hey, that's what I learned. I think that's a really good trait to have or a good tool to have. But outside of that household, when they leave that nest into college and they have their own life, they're going to create their own. So both of you guys, Dr. Ihab and Yusef, you guys can jump in. What do you believe the healthiest way, I guess, to conduct that?
Dr. Ihab, go ahead.
Hypothetically, if we had children, I would probably have brought them up kind of in a hybrid type environment. But it's funny, I would lean a little bit more conservative towards the the old ways, the ways my parents. And it's funny because I wasn't that way, but I would do that because I would want them to learn their kind of what their background and where they come from and how my parents brought me up. I would want to kind of transfer that to them in a way, but I would also want to transfer that American type upbringing as well. And I want to say that I believe that type of upbringing that we saw or what I experienced growing up, I think about 50, 60, 70 years ago here in the United States, it was similar in that conservative type upbringing where the wife would do one thing and the husband would do another. Like the wife would be home with the children and cooking and doing that, the same type of work as you would expect. The Arab families would do in my parents' generation. Now, my generation, it changed a little bit, and then I watched when I was in Egypt. I watched my cousin's daughter, who's going to be getting married at some point soon. They were acting very differently, the two of them, and it was almost like an equal kind of discussion and how they acted. So they were not the typical, and I think the newer generation is not going to be the same as my generation and Slava's generation and my parents' generation, right? That's three different generations. I think as you get to that newer generation that's going to be getting married in their 20s, or mid 20s, they are going to be a little bit more equal, I believe, in the way they have their mindset and how they live their lives and how they're going to have children too. So it's going to be really neat to watch that happen for my cousin's daughter.
That's interesting that you say that, actually. Just because you did tell us you were, that typical child, of course, we always have a rebel in the family, right? So, but you still want to revert back to kind of, again, what you saw, how you were raised. And that's important. Also, what resonates with me is you want them to have a good base and foundation to rely upon, right? And again, it goes back to that cliche. You don't know where you're going. What is it? You don't know where you're going until you know where you come from, or something like that. I'm probably saying it backwards. I'm horrible with sayings, but, it very much resonates and rings true as well, and also it brings up a point. I have a cousin, and he was actually telling me that it comes from a Sicilian background, loves our culture and Arabs in general, but was saying that he's first generation, like myself, but this kind of detachment from the homeland, second generation, third, it happens very quickly. So, what do you kind of do, at this point, right? Especially if you want to, raise your family in a way to understand where they come from and instill these values and cultural aspects, for them to have and to carry on, right? Again, it's good to have this base that you're talking about to rely upon to be able to connect. You were telling me, Dr. Ihab, similar to myself and, my cousins in Michigan, was not raised with them, but we were, or didn't grow up with them, but we were raised similarly. So it was very much natural and felt familial, the first time I met them. I was able to mesh with them because we had this certain similar upbringing. We were raised similarly, a certain understanding how our parents operated, these, again, very traditional, gender roles. My mother comes from more of a Falahi background, more country, while my father is more Madani, from the city. These two cultural aspects, even though there's, in a similar culture, often leads to clashes, believe it or not. Just that is an interesting dichotomy. And I think, Dr. Slava, I learned a little bit about that from your interactions with your parents, so.
It's funny that you mentioned this, because according to this research, I'm just going to read this. It says here, the influence can lead to disparities between immigrants and native-born women in areas like labor force and participation. Some studies suggest that source country gender role can influence labor supply, fertility, and schooling choices of immigrant women even into the second generation. For instance, it shows that immigrant women labor market outcomes can be negatively impacted by traditional gender role attitudes and legislation. So, every household has rules and laws, right? Because of the expectations. So what this study is saying that if you are stickler to that belief system, it's going to affect the labor even as an immigrant here in the United States, because if you don't give that egalitarian right for women to go out there and pursue education and get a job, that affects the economy, right, of the new society that you're trying to simulate in and integrate in. So that's fascinating, because as you said, Yusef, even amongst your parents, there is that, yes, you're allowed to do this, but you're not allowed to do this. So don't cross the line. There is a limitation, and that creates a limited mindset by putting those limited beliefs. What we want to do for our new generation, I'm assuming, because you do have nephews, and I would love to tap into how your brother is going to be raising those nephews, coming from the same household, the same belief system that you grew up with, that we want the new generation to have an unlimited mindset by eliminating limited beliefs, whether it's especially in women, but also there's pressure on males too. You're the head of the house. After I pass, you got to take care of your mother. You got to take care of your sisters. You got to take care of the household. For example, Ihab's cousin daughter, she got engaged. She's engaged to this wonderful, beautiful young man, graduate from pharmacy school. But unfortunately, his dad, who is the breadwinner, he owned the convenience store in Cairo. He ended up passing away from COVID while he was still in pharmacy school, right? So now, as the traditional gender role expectation, he is becoming as an eldest, the breadwinner for that family. His mom is a homemaker. So he had to delay his plans, purchasing a pharmacy, opening his own business, being a business owner, an entrepreneur, in order to run his dad's store to support his mom and his two younger siblings and stabilize that, then execute his plans that he always dreamed of, a career he paid a lot of hard work towards. He invested in himself to become a pharmacist, but he had to delay those dreams and those plans in order to satisfy that traditional gender role expectation, to support his family first, stabilize his dad's business after he passes, then he can move on to open his own pharmacy, get engaged to Ihab's cousin's daughter, start his own life, start his own family. So yes, it is, I guess, according to that study, especially when immigrants come to the United States, if they are within the traditional gender role expectations, that's going to affect them, getting an education, getting a job, getting a career that affects the labor of the society. But also, don't forget, that same pressure can be applied on males, just like the story that I shared with you guys.
That's actually fascinating. And if I can share a fact as well that kind of flows in with this. So, obviously we're talking a little bit about, Arab culture. Again, every peoples has their own culture, their own set of values. But what's very interesting and unique is if we look at specifically the Khoisan people, also known as the Bushmen, they're found in the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. These people genetically have not changed for thousands of years, and they say that all of humanity actually comes from these people. So these are, the original OG humans, for lack of a better term. But in their society, as old as they are, in their society, they actually have a division of labor based upon gender. But it's interesting because they allow this for this egalitarian flexibility. So men typically engaged in hunting, and the women typically are gathering plant foods and water. Women also naturally care for the children, but also prepared the food. But it was expected of both and women to hunt. And not only were they expected to hunt, but women were responsible for the horticulture and for the transfer of knowledge. So the woman in this society is, held at a higher level, right? She's not only giving birth to these men, but raising them. They actually, they don't need to rely on hunting, especially with their agricultural acumen, but also they're transferring all this knowledge as well, which is very fascinating. So just wanted to throw that tidbit of information out there.
That is very interesting. That's why I love knowledge. The more you know, the more you grow. And I grow every single day as I discover and uncover new facts. So we are reaching, believe it or not, to the end of our hour. And I would like to ask our panel of any advice. Let's start with Dr. Ihab, of a young couple that's coming to the United States from Egypt, starting their new life, starting a family, raising their children in this society. From everything that you learned from your parents, what would you say to them?
I would say keep an open mind here, but also keep the tradition. Keep that same, not that the gender roles, the mother does this, the father does that, but I think, work together, like Slava and I do. Like Slava will cook most of the time because she likes to cook, but I will also cook. I have no problem cooking, and kind of just work together. And both should have a kind of a job of some kind. And, unless one of them wants to stay home with the children, but both should have a career, if at all possible. And, bringing up the children, raising the children, I would say utilizing a little bit more of the culture from back home. For me, I would definitely advise them not to get them iPads or any kind of phones when they're young, because I just watch these children. All they're doing is they're on their iPads, and then their parents are on their phones, which is also, it is what it is. So everybody's on a device and nobody's talking to each other. And that is something that we're losing in general in our society. And that interaction is really important. I think, removing the devices and kind of going back to the old ways a little bit, and maybe using some of that cultural, Arab culture from, when they come over, it would be great to teach that to their children. And again, social media and these devices are actually one of the downfalls I see in the future of our society. But that's another story. We won't go down that road right now. But that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, how about you, JD Yusef? Like I said, you have 2 young nephews. From being the uncle, the eldest of the family, the boy. What would you tell them? How would you teach them in your ways?
Yes, I'm me. No, it is beautiful. And I'm actually incredibly proud, and blessed to be able to see kind of these guys do their thing. They are both the youngest of their respective families, also first ones to have children. So it's kind of it's a big deal, and they're also kind of leading the way, which is quite amazing. And also the way that they've started to raise their children is also incredibly beautiful. They want to instill these Arabic values, culture in them. They're watching Miss Rachel, which everybody kind of knows, but they're also watching, an Arab version of Miss Rachel. And honestly, a lot of the children's stuff that they're showing them is actually majority Islamic, and we really don't look at stuff like that. I mean, it's teaching them the language, but that's the majority of kind of what's out there, teaching the young ones, which is again very beautiful. So very blessed.
Yeah, something definitely to be proud of. The message is being bicultural, being bilingual is not a bad thing. It's not, you don't have to have one or the other. Why can't you have both? You can have one and the other, because that will give you the ability to navigate through multicultural setups. And that's beautiful. That needs to be considered as an advantage. You don't have to strip everything that you are and focus on what you are becoming, because then you don't have the cultural competency. You won't have to adapt to different cultures. Regardless what you say, you're going to come to a point one day that you are going to visit your native land and native country and your home world. And you better have these tools in order to navigate, communicate, socialize in that environment. Otherwise, you're not going to be comfortable, right? So it's beautiful to have that multicultural adaptability. It's an advantage to be bicultural. So yes, we need to feed both of them without tapping into the too egalitarian, too strict, too traditional, because we don't want to turn off our children and the new generation from the culture. Our culture is beautiful. Our culture is generous. Our culture is colorful. Our culture it's ancient. It has a lot to offer. So I would take an advantage. It is definitely something that makes us unique, that makes us special. And luckily for the new generation, the world these days is a lot open to accepting that multicultural adaptability or multicultural characteristics in the new generation. It's cool these days. My generation, it wasn't cool. You either one or the other. If you are the other, then you're a traitor, chayin. You left everything behind. If you're not the other, you're more stick to your home world, then you're so uncomfortable within your own skins. But I spend 80% of my time in the Western world. I need to adapt. So it was confusing. It was hard. It was challenging. But I don't think we need to think about it as, good or bad, right or wrong, or wrong. It's don't think about it that way, because you're going to have a very limited mindset by practicing limited beliefs, and that's exactly the purpose of this episode and this podcast. So I would love to thank the panel, Dr. Ihab Abdurrahim and JD Yusef, for coming on today. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Just as a reminder, these episodes are uploaded on every single Wednesday on Spotify and Apple podcast platform. And also you can watch it anytime and anywhere you want on the Greenwood Dental Partner YouTube channel. And so please don't forget to like, share, and push the notification button and subscribe in order not to miss any episodes. And please write us any comments, any questions of topics that you would like us to discuss on the Mindset Mastery Moments. Thank you so much again, and hope to see you guys next time. This is Slava, the Jordanian.